All right, so thank you everybody for taking time out of your schedules to be here today, and especially thank you to our speakers, and especially thank you to the members of the U.S. Energy Security Council and to Patrick Ho, who's here all the way from Hong Kong, and to our Chinese speakers that are also here from very far, obviously. This is going to hopefully be a very interactive and fun discussion for all of you. We have here some of the foremost experts, not just in this town or in this country, but really around the world on the topic of energy security. And these folks have been fighting for fuel choice and for energy security for a very, very long time. I'm Ann Corin. I'm co-director of the Institute for Analysis of Global Security and advisor to the U.S. Energy Security Council. And so let me get started with introductions, and then we'll go into the discussion. So this is Senator Bennett Johnston. You still remain senator for life, right? Who was senator from the great state of Louisiana and chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And next to him is Boyden Gray. Now, Boyden was ambassador to the European Union, and when he served as environmental advisor in the US, he threatened to drink methanol. Threatened to drink methanol, right? You'll tell the story. Right next to him is John Hofmeister, who was president of Shell Oil, and who wrote a book about why people hate the oil companies. Right? I don't hate the oil companies, but a lot of people do. And right next to him is Patrick Ho. Patrick Ho, I always introduce you as a Renaissance man because you truly are. He is currently chairman of the China Energy Fund Committee, but he was former Home Secretary for Home Affairs for Hong Kong. Before that, in his previous incarnation, he was an ophthalmological surgeon. And in his previous incarnation before that, he was a classical violinist, like a concert violinist. So we might ask for a musical interlude in the afternoon break. Right next to him is Jim Woolsey, former director of Central Intelligence. And right next to him is Bud McFarland, former National Security Advisor. And Jim and Bud are co-founders of the U.S. Energy Security Council. And without further ado, let's get started. So, you know, since the shale revolution, there's been a tremendous amount of optimism in the US, and let's say the political system has kind of gone to sleep on the subject of energy security. We have enormous reserves of oil, of natural gas. The political system seems to think that that's enough to do away with volatility in the oil market, do away with any of the concerns that have really driven the energy security agenda, if you will, the drive to fuel choice, the drive to reduce the strategic importance of oil. We don't think it's all kumbaya, right? So what's the real situation as you see it, Bud? Why do we still have to be focused on this issue?
Thanks, Ann. Some things don't change. Specifically, the amount of oil proven recoverable in the world is owned by a cartel. About 70% of all the proven recoverable reserves in the world are owned by the OPEC countries, primarily in the Middle East. And so, if this organization is disciplined and able to control its production ever lower, then the price is going to go up. Well, we are still here in the United States importing ourselves about 10 million barrels a day. So it is nice. It is a blessing to have the discoveries of an increased production of shale oil. But it isn't to say that we don't need still foreign oil or that we can really influence the price dramatically. at the margin, the price is going to be driven by the sentiments of the OPEC cartel. You stop and think about how it could further be at risk and beyond our control. You just have to think about what has Russia been doing in the last few years. Russia has, by its military moves and geopolitical strategy, established a very solid position in the Middle East, in Syria. Today it has an Air Force base and a Navy port, and really the decisive influence over stability in Syria, with ambitions to go further. And that isn't simply because they like the climate on the Mediterranean. It's oil and the ability to influence the price of oil by influencing, in geopolitical terms, the OPEC countries. Russia has further advanced its own interest in Iran, primarily by its ability to sell military hardware, advanced air defense systems. But if you picture that map, then, going from west to east, from Lebanon through Syria, through Iraq to Iran, it isn't too much to imagine that Russia could consolidate a prevailing influence over the politics of that entire region. The United States has been responsible for the security of the Middle East for about 72 years now. And that came as a consequence of President Roosevelt's commitment to the founder of Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz, in 1945, that the United States would assure the security of the entire region. And the motive behind that was the conscious understanding that that's the source of the majority of the supply of oil to the entire world. In recent years, the United States has been withdrawing from the Middle East, and Russia has seized upon the opportunity to fill that vacuum. Further, it is consolidating its influence by not only having a physical presence, but by introducing the ability to generate nuclear power in each of the Gulf Arab countries and already in Iran. Now, if you have the ability to control the global supply of oil to Asia, to Europe, by having an influence on OPEC pricing, and if you further have increased that influence by the fact that you could literally turn out the lights in Saudi Arabia, all of the Gulf countries, and the Middle East region, because of your nuclear power proliferation throughout that region. So you have two sources of influence on the politics and decision-making of OPEC, and a physical presence that is decisive. It is still feasible for the United States to turn that condition around by introducing nuclear power generation ourselves with a better material solution for that step. That is, if you're looking for nuclear power and you're Saudi Arabia, would you rather have it provided by Russia, which will bring a very large Russian presence and ultimately own the power plants that are supplying and in a position to turn out the lights in your country, or the United States, which will provide the power, provide local ownership, local training, the introduction of hundreds of thousands of jobs locally, and a guarantee still in place to assure the security of Saudi, Kuwait, the Emirates, Egypt, and Jordan, in short, to return the flag of the United States to the Middle East. It's been withdrawing now for the better part of the last 8 years. So in short, we still face essentially the same problem, Ann, that we did when we had our last conference here. OPEC still drives the price of oil. Yes, we have more production in the United States, but by virtue of owning 70% of all the proven recoverable reserves, with discipline, OPEC is still in a position to set the global price of oil. In order to turn that around, we have to introduce alternative fuels. And that's been the subject of our 3 methanol conferences here. It is within reach. But Ann, why don't you go ahead and develop that side of the equation?
So actually, John, this is for you. I'm thinking if I look at the shale revolution, there's the oil side of it, but to my mind, the part of the shale revolution that could have a lot more influence down the road on the oil market is actually the natural gas part. And we really haven't done a good job of using the natural gas in a way to force oil into arbitrage with natural gas over the fuel tank. You, as a former oil executive that understands the minds of oil executives, is methanol friend or foe in the mind of an oil executive? How to get an oil industry in which natural gas is a major and growing part of their reserve base, essentially, to recognize that methanol is the best way for growing demand for natural gas?
I think the best way to respond is to respond as a business person. There's money in methanol. There's no money in natural gas. If you're burning molecules to make electricity, there's no money in that. You are not adding any value to the molecules. You're simply lighting a match and burning them, and you're spinning turbines to make electricity. If you want to make money out of natural gas, which is one of the reasons why the oil people are so committed to oil, you can make a lot of money with oil because look at all the things you can do with oil. You can not only fuel the transportation industry, but you can supply the chemical industry, everything from clothing or cloth to fine chemicals that enable us to live and have a 21st century lifestyle because of all that comes through chemical engineering. So you make money, you make margin out of all the oil that you produce. When you're producing natural gas to turn a turbine, you're actually producing no value other than you turn the turbine. But if you're making methanol, or if you're making ethanol, or if you're making chemicals, now you're doing something with natural gas that is adding value to it, and that's what a business person wants to do. They want to make money. And so what has, however, hampered the ability to turn methanol into an alternative fuel, or hydrogen for that matter, into a fuel, an alternative fuel, is the policy system of the nation. The policy system of the nation, all of which culminates in this town one way or another, is frozen under the powers of the status quo. All of the apparatus that we have built into the policy system supports the status quo because that's how the system has learned to operate effectively as it defines itself. Stick with the status quo. And too much change is viewed as threatening the status quo, which causes all kind of pushback. And so the amount of human energy or the risks associated with that human energy to make a change in the public policy that allows alternatives to occur is very, very difficult. What we're going through now, after 8 years of, while I absolutely agree with Bud and Bud's analysis of the last 8 years with respect to the Middle East, if you switch the conversation to the last 8 years on environmental regulation, we're going back to the status quo just as fast as we can. because what was done in the last 8 years threatens the status quo, which makes my point on policy. It is rooted in the status quo, and until we can figure out a policy angle or figure out the who, the what, the why, the when, the where, and the how to affect the policy, we're going to be stuck with what we've got. I worry because an alternative infrastructure for this country for something as valuable as transportation fuel takes 15 to 20 years to build. If we're in a crisis because of the geopolitics of the Middle East, Straits of Hormuz somehow shut down, 25% of the world's oil no longer available to the world, we're in serious trouble. For this country, that'd be several million barrels a day we don't have. We'd have gas lines in 3 days, and those gas lines would only get worse, regardless of the shale revolution, because we don't have the alternative system. And so we need 15 to 20 years. That's why we're so aggressive now, and we're so adamant now, because the next 10 to 20 years, is the world going to get better, or is the world going to get worse in terms of the geopolitical relationship? So we've got a big problem on top of us. We live day by day, and that is a fact of life. We live in the transportation world day by day when we are so dependent upon foreign imports. And we could never produce all of our own oil based upon however people read the shale revolution. The reserves aren't there. Shale is much overwritten as a source of oil. But I go back to your point, it's a very rich source of natural gas. And that's what we should be developing, and natural gas is an alternative fuel.
So let me kind of go back to you again and ask you, if here you are speaking to a lot of methanol executives, and if you were to tell them, you have a meeting tomorrow with the CEO of Exxon, for example, or the CEO of Shell, how do you get them on board so they're the ones that start through API and they're kind of their government affairs people, so they're the ones that start pushing, opening the market to methanol, opening cars to methanol? Because obviously that would make a huge difference on the policy side.
It comes back to what are the policy signals. I actually have asked that question of my colleagues in the oil business, to ask CEOs of oil companies, what would it take for you to convert your production capabilities from oil to alternative fuels? And they said, I need the signals from the government that I can make money in the new direction. And the commonly used commercial term is, I got to go with my book. My book is my current book of assets. And if I've got refineries producing transportation fuel from oil, why would I go against that when there are no signals in the public policy arena that says we're going in a different direction? I actually put that question directly to a CEO of a major downstream company that everybody in this room has heard of, who said, you know, you give me a signal that over the next 10, 12, 15 years, ethanol or methanol will be a key part of the transportation system, I'm there. I'm with you. I'll have the time and the money to do what it takes to be present when that market is to be served. But if I don't get any signals that way, then I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
And you're actually talking about a huge profit potential for them, because you look at the natural gas reserves of Shell, of Exxon, of the other internationals, they're just huge. They're huge.
Well, what's the opposite of a cartel? Competition. Where do people make money? One or the other. We know how in this country to make money through competition. What's the value add? What's the, what is the opportunity for, the gamesmanship of having a better product and charging for it? And first in is often the best place to be, because you get the highest margin until others come along and copy you. And so you want to make money. That's what you want to do. That's why this is a business, not a state-owned oil industry. And we know how to make money. And so it's just a matter of the public, to me, it's the public policy signals.
So when we're talking about public policy signals, we have to turn to you, Senator Johnston. You know, as former chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, you think, what are the committees that are involved in energy policy? That's one. Commerce Committee is another because of the Department of Transportation and fuel efficiency standards and all that. And Environment and Public Works is another because of the Clean Air Act and the regulations on fuels and power plants and so forth. When I was listening to the Jilly presentation earlier, we've been warning for years, Patrick, close your ears, that the methanol is a Chinese Sputnik, okay? And what I see is the Chinese Sputnik is just launching and it's ready to go. Now, good for the Chinese. I'm happy for the Chinese, but what does that mean for us? We're way behind. You have tremendous experience, not just on the policymaking front. How do we get our ducks in a row? How does the United States Congress start acting on this issue? But also on the coal front, we have this, China has embraced coal. The United States has issues with coal. Coal has tremendous potential, despite the fact that in the US it's more expensive than natural gas. But all of this, how do we overcome all of these hurdles to start competing with the Chinese?
Well, to get to your question a moment ago is why you don't have methanol. Why can't you get Exxon or API to go along with methanol as a blending fuel? There's a little thing called corn ethanol, an agricultural interest. You know, they're fighting a big battle now, the oil companies, with the corn ethanol people over the renewable fuel standard, which the corn people want to increase, and the API wants to keep about where it is. The need for a blending fuel for an oxygenate is great. It so happens that methanol is really a better fuel than ethanol. But the politics are that the agriculture interferes in the meantime. The future really of methanol is, I think, extremely bright. I was just talking to my dear friend Dan Combs, some of you know from MIT, who speaks of California. You know, California is going to require that you do away with diesel because of the NOx, which is a very big problem in California. There was a piece on PBS this morning about the fact that I think it's 2030 they want to have total clean energy standard. Now, how do you do that? Well, Dan says gasoline mixed with methanol is not only 40% more efficient, but totally devoid of NOx and, of course, CO2 and all the other bad things, PM and all those things. Now, there is a market, and how do you get the political system to go along with it? California, believe me, has woken up to these issues, and I think there's a very good chance that California will require something that will make methanol the fuel of choice in California. Now, there are all kind of other choices from methanol. Last time I spoke on one of these panels, the price of crude was over $100 a barrel, and the comparison of using methanol as a, you know, either at M15 or even M60 made a whole lot of sense. I think it still makes sense, but only half as much sense at $50 a barrel than it did at $100 a barrel. One thing I'd like to point out in my 40 years of watching energy is how unexpected changes are and how often they take place in energy. You know, I've been through the first oil crisis with the Yom Kippur War. 6 years later, the Iranian oil crisis, where the price went up, quadrupled overnight. We've seen Humbert's Peak come and go twice. Natural gas looks like it's unlimited supply now. But the fact of the matter in energy, you ought to prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and expect to be surprised. And I think the surprise in energy is likely to come in methanol. It's more flexible, it's cleaner, it's cheaper, it's more available, and the demand is going up, what, 7% a year compared to GDP at 3% a year. The future for methanol to take over in not only transportation fuels, but in all the other great uses as a feedstock, et cetera, is very great. And I think the political establishment will be swept away in the tide of economics and environmental policy that really demands that we use more and more methanol.
So I'm going to come back to you again and say, you know, let's talk about the great state of Louisiana, okay? You, Senator Landrieu that followed you, who's also a member of the U.S. Energy Security Council, embrace the notion of fuel choice, understand the notion of fuel choice. Talk about the sitting senators from Louisiana. There's a methanol industry that's growing in Louisiana. Methanol executives in the room, what do they need to say to these senators? What do they need to do in order to get them on board with a fuel choice agenda? What needs to happen?
Well, for fuel choice, really, it get back to corn ethanol.
Well, fuel choice that includes methanol. If we look at flex fuel vehicles that methanol can run on, if we look at mid blends or high blends of methanol, really across the board, making it an option. So if we're looking at, for example, reform of CAFE standards, so that methanol, if we look at the bill that Rand Paul introduced in the last session of Congress, for example, that would allow automakers to meet a large portion of their requirements by making most of their vehicles fuel choice compatible.
We really need to demonstrate the use of methanol and its efficiency. We were talking just earlier about the fact that we need to build a demonstration in California showing just what I said about 40% more efficient and cleaner as a substitute for diesel. Europe, by the way, is going to be diesel-free in not too many years. I mean, they are not going to put up with diesel any longer. In the United States, in automobiles, you've already got this renewable fuel standard, and it's embedded. It's hard to change. But if we can demonstrate that methanol is more efficient and cheaper, then I think we can get the policymakers to go along. I don't think it's just as simple to say, make your cars fuel flexible. I think we've got to demonstrate that it makes more sense, and we haven't really demonstrated that. We know it's true, but we haven't demonstrated on a large scale.
Thank you. Jim, we talk about the Chinese Sputnik, right? Methanol being the Chinese Sputnik. We saw the Geely presentation, mass production of methanol cars ready to go. Why is it that the United States, as Churchill said, we always do the right thing when we run out of every other option, right? I mangled the quote, but I have no doubt that, 20 years from now, we're going to be sitting here and most cars will be either flex fuel or flex fuel plug-in hybrids or something like that, because it makes economic sense, bottom line. It makes economic sense because the Middle East isn't going to start singing Kumbaya, not going to happen. We're going to be hit with oil crisis after oil crisis, even though prices are good. You think about security issues. How urgent of a matter is this to solve?
I think it's quite urgent, and the reason hasn't really been mentioned yet, which is, at least as far as I'm concerned, there are two empires that create serious problems for all of us and for the West in general and for China. And one of them, Bud spoke about substantially, Russia. But Russia is not an ideological state. It stopped being interested in from each according to his ability to each according to his need sometime back in the 1940s. I'd negotiated at some length with those guys 4 times, and they weren't interested in from each according to his ability to each according to his need. They were interested in modernizing their dachas. They had no interest in ideology. They were only about power and money. And they are now a KGB state. Quite literally, virtually all of the senior people in government in Russia are cronies of Putin's from his KGB days. So Russia is a KGB state focused on power and money, and we kind of know how to deal with that. That's as old as regions and countries clashing with one another. But there's something different going on with another empire that we haven't talked about, and that, in my mind, is Iran. Because Iran is not just a state that is interested in power and money. It is highly ideological in its ruler and in its ruling class and in the Revolutionary Guard and the whole structure of decision-making. Iran is at the front end loaded up with and run by theocratic, totalitarian, genocidal imperialists. And that is not just a string of expletives. Theocratic, shouldn't doubt that. Ayatollah Khamenei runs the country, and the Revolutionary Guard does what he says, and the elections have a little bit of significance, but not much. Totalitarian, nobody should doubt that. When you massacre kids in the streets, as they did back in 08, 09, as your method of dealing with demonstrations, you're pretty totalitarian. Theocratic, totalitarian, genocidal. Virtually all meetings in Iran begin with a cry for destruction of Israel and destruction of the United States. I would call that genocide. And imperialists, the expansion is there. The efforts of the terrorists that are funded by Iran are front and center. It's the leading terrorist state in the world, and by anybody's calculation. And whether you're talking about the Houthis trying to take over Yemen, or you're talking about Hezbollah or Hamas, Iran's terrorism and its use to expand an imperial Iran is very much at the heart of their governing system. And because of the highly ideological character of the Iranian regime, we have a different problem with them than we did with the Russians, say, during the Cold War, as far as nuclear weapons or other very powerful weapons are concerned. With the Soviet Union, we had several times, 3, maybe 4 times, which we came very, very close to nuclear war with the Soviets. But things more or less got calmed down, in part because ultimately everybody had enough common sense not to take it all the way. But if you are a theocratic, totalitarian, genocidal imperialist, you may not have that sense of balance. You may be pretty much a fanatic. And if the next time we have a crisis and are on the verge of war in the Middle East, whoever the participants are, whether they're all Middle Eastern or they involve some Russians or they involve America, whatever, if we have that develop and we see the spread of nuclear weapons as it is now taking place in the Middle East, thanks in no small measure to the United States having signed what I believe is the worst international agreement it has ever signed in its 2¼ centuries of history. If we have a spread of nuclear weapons in the Middle East, so the next time we are verging on hostilities, and we have 4 or 5 nuclear powers, some Sunni, some Shia, Israel, and us, whatever, Russia. If we have that morass, instead of Israel sitting quietly on the sidelines, which is really the only nuclear power now so far, we could have a terrible outcome, the worst that one could really imagine. And so oil and gas to Iran are not just about power and money, the way they are, I think, with Russia, about that in Russia. In Iran, we have a really strong, fanatical ideology that has many adherents that are not as calm and balanced as the Soviets turned out to be during the Cold War and some of the crises of the Cold War. I think trying to do everything we can with methanol, with whatever, in order to weaken Iran's power and to make Iran less able to make decisions which would take us onto a very dangerous territory. The more we can use anything to keep that from happening, the better off we all are.
You know, when you think about it, and you look at the Middle East, which is really has been the breadbasket of the world's conventional oil reserves. Again, despite our shale revolution, that's where the cheap to produce oil is. It's amazing when you think about the potential for volatility there. You have not just the conflict between Shia and Sunni, but also the conflict between Sunni and Sunni. We look now at the Saudi and their allies versus Qatar. You look at the rise of Islamic extremism within the Sunni states themselves, kind of a monster that was created perhaps to send the enemy out of the gates so it wouldn't attack the rulers of particular states, now coming to attack them and to destabilize them. We see failed states proliferating slowly but surely, a proliferation of failed states. It just boggles the mind that we are so complacent that we think that we can go on just as we are. Something that can't go on will not go on. Reality eventually will smack us in the face.
I imagine many people here know the story of the frog and the scorpion, but I will tell it very briefly. Frog and scorpion run into each other on the banks of the Suez Canal. They would normally fight immediately to the death, but the scorpion says, look, we're both trying to get across the canal, right? And you can swim and I can't, and you can't see very well when you're swimming. Why don't I get on your back and I'll direct you, and you swim and we'll go across the canal and then we'll go our own way. If we meet again, we may have to fight to the death, but at least we'll get across, do something useful. We'll get across the canal. And the frog says, well, okay. Gets in the water, the scorpion gets on his back, they start swimming across the Suez Canal. As they get about halfway across, the scorpion reaches down, stings the frog, and they both are sinking beneath the waves. And the frog says to the scorpion, why did you do that? Now we're both going to die. And the scorpion says, don't be ridiculous. This is the Middle East.
Oh, boy. And on that optimistic note, Boyden, you've been working on this issue for a very, very long time. Like I said, years and years ago, you threatened to drink methanol. I remember when I first heard this story from you, when we were talking about methanol to different people, and some folks in the auto industry said, oh, methanol, it's toxic, as if gasoline is a beverage, right? So there's the congressional side of this, there's the industry side of this, there's the administrative, the executive branch side of this, there's international cooperation. What in your mind are the most important steps that need to occur to make methanol finally a reality, to follow? Right now we would be following in the footsteps of China instead of leading, but at the very least, to follow.
Well, let me just say, it came up, the question of my drinking methanol came up because when I was advocating in the White House for alternative fuels, methanol being the foremost at that time, API sent a delegation to me to tell me that I should stop doing this, and the first argument they made was, this is going to push up the price of natural gas. And I looked at him and said, my boss, George Herbert Walker Bush, goes to bed every night praying that the price of natural gas will go up. And so they quickly dropped that, and they said, no, well, methanol is toxic. And I said, well, the dose makes the poison, so is gasoline. I'll drink twice the volume of methanol of any volume of gasoline you'll drink. And I made this challenge several times publicly, and I never got taken up on it. And one day I awoke to find an ad by Mobil in the bottom. They used to run ads on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, and the ad said, "Don't do it, Boyden." That was the headline. There's a little choke point for this whole thing, and it's called EPA, and it's called an element that exists in Ann Arbor, and they have blocked all competition in the transportation side of the environment. If you're a utility, you have a choice of coal, gas, wind, sun, hydro, nuclear. I mean, you've got plenty of choices, biomass. If you're a car company, I mean, now I think we never used much diesel, but that's out. It's really only gasoline. If you're a car company or a consumer of a car, that's the only choice you got. So what's the cause of that? It's called the blend wall. What EPA has done, and this is where people misunderstand the renewable fuel standard. The renewable fuel standard is not any kind of support or subsidy for ethanol. It's a cap on any alcohol fuel, any alternative fuel at 10%. And you can't go higher than that. And until that blend wall is broken, you can't. Now, how do you break the blend wall? Well, the blend wall is based on a bunch of really impenetrable rules at the Environmental Protection Agency. They make it all impenetrable so no layman, no sensible person can begin to understand it. And you have to spend a lifetime trying to figure it out. But the key at the moment is EPA's assertion that when you add or you blend an alcohol fuel, ethanol, methanol, MTBE, whatever it would be, MTBE is sort of out for other reasons, ETBE, whatever it is, pollution goes up. Now, we all know that's not true. We all know you've heard this morning about ethanol is higher in octane, methanol is higher in octane, it has this charged cooling effect, very high heat of vaporization. It's much cleaner than gas. Everyone knows this. So what EPA has done is rig some tests using fuels that are not only not used in the marketplace, but would be illegal in the marketplace, where they pack a lot of the really bad crap in gasoline called aromatics. They pack a lot of crap into the gasoline, add a little alcohol fuel, and say, look at the increase in emissions. That's all because of the addition. It's an incredible scam. I mean, I've never seen anything in government quite so boldly outrageous and provocatively shameful. Now, this needs to be exposed, and the minute it is exposed, you will all win. So I'll rest my case there, and if you want to know more, call me up. There are a lot of people who know about this, not a lot actually, but it is an incredible scam that they're now running at EPA in order to block the use of any alternative fuel. One final point. CAFE standards are really dictated by a statute called EPCA, which is implemented by Department of Transportation, National Highway Traffic Safety, and NHTSA. And it permitted, and NHTSA authorized 3 or 4 years ago, a certain set of incentives for the use of alternative fuels homemade. EPA didn't like that, so EPA's parallel rules, without telling anybody, made it impossible. They actually eliminated the statutory incentives that were proposed and finalized by NHTSA. Now, where does EPA get that power? Where on earth does EPA get that power? Well, it's a very, very powerful agency, and you guys really ought to focus on it. And, this is Environment and Public Works. It's not your old committee. It's Environment and Public Works. It's a little group in Ann Arbor, and they really need to be shaken up a little bit.
It strikes me that the U.S. Energy Security Council needs to request a meeting with our President Trump. Because if you talk about not business as usual, at least a promise of not business as usual, and shaking things up, and saying this is something that can be a huge benefit for the U.S. economy, a huge benefit for U.S. national security, a positive way that nations, including the U.S. and China, can collaborate, and just a massive utilization of our own energy resources. But there's a logjam here created by the bureaucracy, and there's a logjam here created by a Congress that's not doing what it needs to do. Perhaps we should do that. So, Patrick, now over to you. So first of all, hats off to China. I have to say, every time I see a presentation by a Chinese company working on methanol or a Chinese auto company working on methanol, I'm impressed and astounded. The pace at which China has moved to embracing methanol is just simply astounding. We know that already, if we look at the actual numbers, including illegal blending, they're probably around 10% of the transportation fuel supply is already methanol. That's including illegal blending that's going on. And that's in a very short period of time. So projecting this forward is just amazing. And methanol has a huge clean air benefit for China also, because China cares about breathing, right? That's the primary concern. In fact, it's also a concern for regime stability, if I'm not mistaken, that people can actually breathe properly and breathe well. We did a report together, U.S.-China Transportation Fuel Cooperation, the U.S. Energy Security Council, and the China Energy Fund Committee, a bilingual report a few years back, recommending how U.S. and China can move together on these issues. What is your dream when you listen to all the folks in this room? When you think of the potential, what is your dream when you look at this issue?
Well, we all know that methanol is very important for China's overall development for a few reasons. Number one is energy security issues, because right now China is dependent upon 67 to 68% of its oil being imported. So it cannot afford it to be more, insecure in that way. And China's, on the other hand, the number of vehicles in China is rapidly increasing. And right now, the last census I read, China has over 170 million vehicles, automobiles. All right, and they all use gasoline, and they consume about 55% of China's gasoline, and it will be increasing. And China needs a way to address that. That's number one, is energy security issue. The second one is environmental issues, because the gasoline is, all sort of emission standards and also all sort of pollutions. And we need an alternative fuel that's cleaner. Cleaner in the sense that it does not emit as much less PM 2.5. What really hazardous to humans' health may not be CO2. CO2 is for next generation to consider. It's the SOx, it's the NOx, but most importantly and most devastatingly is PM 2.5. With methanol, there's no PM 2.5 because you burn everything. So it's clean in that respect, And it is affordable. It's affordable because China has a lot of coal. A lot of coal is being used to generate electricity, to generate natural gas. But a lot of coal is also generating also dirtier modalities of coal, called coke, called coke oven gas with high sulfur content, all these things. If you burn these things, it will be devastating to the atmosphere and for pollution as well. But if you can also turn these coke oven gas into methanol and burn it very cleanly. So it's a way of addressing the coal transformation and a way to help China to use the coal more efficiently in that way. So in many ways, methanol development is important for China to address its impending problems. So what I see is that methanol presents itself as a sustainable, as an efficient, and also as a cleaner and also affordable alternative fuel to answer to today's transportation problem. And also beyond that, because of the methanol economy, we can talk more about that too. And I think methanol is particularly suited for China's development, and China should really position itself to be exemplary to the world in spearheading a methanol economy in that respect. Yeah. So I look forward to what I look forward to is the day when we are talking about methanol, we were considering a cheaper alternative fuel, which would be called gasoline. That would be the day.
There you go. Just like in 2008, gasoline actually became an alternative fuel in Brazil. They used more ethanol than they did gasoline because ethanol on a per mile basis was cheaper. And at just one point, I think it boggles the mind to a lot of Westerners when they realize that methanol made from coal in China actually cleans up the air as compared to gasoline or diesel made from petroleum.
That's right. Because with the coal, you can burn it in different ways. Okay, I'm not a chemist, but I use the layman terms in explaining to you how coal is being used in China. There's 3 different ways. One is liquefactions. Okay, by coal into liquids. Going to liquids, a lot of these liquids is going to be methanol, DME, naphthalene, and all those things. The other way is gasification, using coal and burning it to gas. But with gas, you can also condense it, liquefy it, and then you get methanol as well, and DME and methane and olefin and all those things. The third way is cooking. You just burn it with oxygen. But with that cooking, you get a variety of different products. You get pet coke, you get coke oven gas, and you get all sort of benzene derivatives of those things. And they can also generate methanol in that respect. So there are various ways of using coal, and coal is plentiful in China. It's affordable in China. I think it defies all logic to ask Chinese not to use coal.
My goal is that at the next methanol conference, we also have someone from India, from the Indian government, who will talk about how methanol is becoming a ubiquitous fuel in India because of the huge economic and clean air potential. Because when you think of the Tata Nano, if you're going to make a Tata Nano that's affordable and runs on non-petroleum fuel, really your only option is methanol. That's your only option. All right, so with that, thank you very much to our panel. And